WIBC. Pacers basketball. Run, 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 run. Running commentary, extraordinary. We're the champs. Pacers. Top of the leap, we're the champs. Indianapolis.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Greetings and salutations, friends. How are you? My name's Tim Hanlon, and the podcast that you've stumbled across, it's called Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. I can't thank you enough for stopping by and downloading us and giving us a listen, whatever you're doing, commuting or on an airplane or driving somewhere or just somehow can't fall asleep and you need something boring and monotonous to lull you into nap and sleep land. Whatever the reason you're here, we thank you so much. And hopefully we'll entertain you for a little while. We are veering back into basketball and the ABA again, and we continue to be amazed by the uptake in our conversations around the ABA. We've had a bunch. Obviously, we talked with our friend Pat Boone over the holidays and his 2-year ownership of the Oakland Oaks. We've talked to Dan Forer, who is the producer and the director of the 30 for 30 ESPN movie about the St. Louis Spirits called Free Spirits. As you know, we had a nice 2-part conversation with Mark Monteith a couple of weeks ago to talk about the Indiana Pacers. And we're going to revisit the Pacers again today, but from a different angle and different perspective. Our guests today are Bob Netolicky, who is one of the star players and was a rock, if you will, in that franchise's ABA history for just about every season, I think, save for one, where he had a couple of cups of coffee with a couple of other teams that wound up coming back, and was well known not only for his dogged play on the court, but his, shall we say, interesting persona off the court as well. The Joe Namath of the ABA, as he was sort of referred to. He also being a bar and club owner with a place called Netto's in the Meadows, which was the place to hang out in Indianapolis before, during, and certainly after ABA Pacer games, and then some. He is joined in our conversation with author and writer Robin Miller, who together with Netto and Dick Tinkham, who is not in our conversation but is also part of this book that we're going to be discussing. Dick Tinkham was the one of the co-owners, co-founders, and folks to bring the original ABA franchise to Indianapolis in 1967. And together, the three of them have authored a book which comes out in a couple of weeks. It's called, not surprisingly, We Changed the Game. And the subtitle is How a New League, a Small Group of Dreamers and Some Amazing Situations Changed the Culture of a City and the Face of Basketball Forever. And, you know, again, we had a nice sort of scene setting with Mark Monteith a couple of weeks back. But this conversation is a little bit different in that we're going to be kind of dealing with folks who are literally in the midst of it, right? A key player, obviously one of the key architects of the franchise, and obviously somebody who, as a young Cub reporter, a little green behind the ears, a little wet behind the ears, but we'll find out how he matured as a soon-to-become adult male in the literally in and around the locker room of the Indiana Pacers. And this book is chock full of first-person accounts and stories, not only the Pacers in Indianapolis, but the ABA. And you know, there, as we'll allude to in this conversation, you know, there are only a handful of real places sort of get some of these stories sort of firsthand. Obviously, Loose Balls, the seminal work by Terry Pluto that came out back in the 90s, probably arguably the deepest sort of tome of first-person remembrances. But other than that, not a lot. I mean, a lot of historical accounts, and obviously the book that Mark wrote was very deep and detailed. But the first-person accounts are kind of few and far between, and that's our conversation this week, today, with Bob Netolicky and Robin Miller about the book We Changed the Game, coming up in a couple of seconds. A couple of things I want to sort of talk about here in relation to this book. As you're going to hear in our conversation, the portions of the proceeds of this book is going to an organization, a charitable group called the Dropping Dimes Foundation, which the guys are involved with and is literally dedicated to helping give back to former ABA, American Basketball Association players who, unfortunately, not like today's big time NBA players, they don't get any pensions. They have no sort of security to depend on, and clearly didn't make a whole ton of dough during their days as players back in the late 60s and early 70s. So this organization, the Dropping Dimes Foundation, is a noble cause, and it's great to see the some of the proceeds of this book will be going to that foundation to help former ABA players who are, for whatever reasons, financially dependent, to at least get some kind of support in their advancing age. And it's also interesting, too, because come April 7 in Indianapolis, the Dropping Dimes Foundation will be hosting a 50th ABA anniversary celebration at the Bankers Life Fieldhouse there in Indianapolis. And you can find out how to get tickets and more information about that big event, as well as supporting, of course, the Dropping Dimes Foundation at droppingdimes.org. That's droppingdimes.org. And indeed, it's well worth checking out. And frankly, I'd love to show up and see if I can make a trek out there on April 7th to join in on the 50th ABA anniversary celebration. So our conversation with Bob Netolicky and Robin Miller coming up in just a couple of seconds, and we invite you to stay tuned for that. And let's see, promotionally, I want to remind you that Audible audiobooks are what we love and what we love to tell you about and encourage you to try for yourself. And as a sponsor of the show, we can't thank them enough for doing so, and we certainly encourage you to give them a try and get a free audiobook download, yours for just showing up at audibletrial.com/goodseats. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats, and you're going to get a free month of the Audible audiobook service, as well as a free audiobook download for you to choose from I think it's over 185,000 and counting titles to choose from. And there's just, there's no excuse to not be able to find a book that's going to be interesting to you. I mean, it's like going into a vast library, closing your eyes, and if you can't find something, you're on the wrong planet. But audibletrial.com/goodseats, it's the place to go to get your free audiobook download and a free 1 month trial of the Audible service. And again, I need to underline and stress this: you can cancel at any time. So it's really a no-risk proposition. And if you've been sort of thinking about giving it a try and maybe giving a little love to your friends here at the Good Seats Still Available podcast, by all means, give it a try, and we appreciate your doing so. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats. Get your free download, your free book, and your free 1 month trial of the service now. And again, also, to our sponsors at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Sportshistorycollectibles.com is a veritable treasure trove of all kinds of fun stuff, whether it be programs or magazines or buttons or pennants or you name it, cards, all kinds of interesting memorabilia from the teams and leagues that somehow are no longer with us, or indeed are with us, but were in various incarnations prior. And I believe you'll find some Pacers stuff at sportshistorycollectibles.com. You'll find plenty of ABA stuff for sure. And if you use the promo code GOODSEATS at checkout, you're going to get 15% off your purchases. Again, that's sportshistorycollectibles.com. And your promo code GOODSEATS for 15% off all of your purchases. And we thank not only the site, but its proprietor, Dean Mitchell, for their sponsorship of our little podcast. Thank you so much. Give them a try, and we appreciate it. All right, let's segue nice and smoothly, shall we, to our conversation with the great Indiana Pacer, Bob Netolicky, and his colleague, writer, Robin Miller, and the book we're going to be talking about is called We Changed the Game. Coming up, please enjoy.
I think what you're saying is what we've been hearing a lot, that the ABA is, a lot of people want to know about it, but there's just not that much out there. I mean, it's like, most of it's he said, she said, or somebody grew up, and my dad used to go to the games, and it's a lot of it is a third, fourth, fifth person narrative, and that's why we kind of put our heads together. This started about 4 years ago with Dick Tinkham, a regional Pacer owner, and he was laughing to me, telling me all these stories he keeps reading, and 90% of them aren't true because they just don't know what they're talking about. And so he said, before we pass on, let's tell them the real stories. So that's what our book. It's not a, so to speak, a game and basketball book. It's from three guys that were there, and we're telling the real stories. And some people don't like, but facts are facts. And even myself, I've learned so much from talking to Dick in the last 3 or 4 years. I was amazed at some of the stories that I never knew, and I was a player.
Well, let's talk about sort of how this all came together. Maybe Robin, as the sort of the chief ringleader on the writing and the consolidation of the stories and the narrative. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of background as to how you and Dick and Bob sort of kind of came together and decided that a book was not only worthwhile, but the manner in which to tell these stories and bring them to life.
Well, I mean, Ned and I have known each other for 50 years. I mean, he adopted me when I was 18, 19 years old, covering the Pacers. Not too many teenagers covered pro basketball, and so, whenever we see each other, we always tell stories. We go see Slick. We get George, and it used to be Mel. We go to lunch and once a month, and there's so many great stories and so many great memories and so many characters. The ABA had everything. They had great basketball. They had exciting games. They had all these wonderful characters, this Wild West kind of atmosphere. And we were just, they'd been kicking this idea around before they talked to a couple different people about doing it. And then we just had a meeting at Dick's one day, and they said, would you be interested in helping us write our memoir about the ABA and the Pacers and how it turned the city of Indianapolis around and all that? Because Dick and I didn't really know each other that well. I don't think he really understood how involved I was until Neto told him. So I said, well, let's see, what's it going to pay? Nothing? Yeah, sign me up. I'm gonna spend 3 years writing a book for free. That'll be good. No, but I really didn't care because it was a definite labor of love, because the story has never been told, Tim, and that's why it's such a cool story. Not because I wrote it or because I had anything to do with it. When people read this book, they're going to be like, you got to be kidding me. Because the way the Pacers survived and all the pitfalls they overcame and all the times they almost folded, and when you see the skyline of Indianapolis in 1968 or 67 and you see it today, and you look, there's one place you can look, and you can look at the Coliseum and you can look at the Pacers, and you can say, without them, we'd never have all this.
And it's kind of interesting the way we found Robin. Dick and I have been talking about this for over 4 years, and we talked to 2 or 3 different writers, and it just kind of dawned on me that I thought, my God, Dick and I were there. We're trying to tell this thing from a first-person narrative instead of like 99% of books out there are all third, fourth-person narratives. And I thought, my gosh, the one guy that was with us from day one, and I talked to Dick and I said, I just thought of something. I said, Robin Miller was there from day one. Well, Dick really wasn't that, like Robin said, up on Robin. He didn't realize that Robin was there from literally traveling with the team since he was a 18-year-old virgin, and we took him under our wing, and he saw things that 99% of the writers out there never saw. I mean, it's one thing to write a book about sports and about teams and things, but if you look at most books, and even Loose Balls, which is a fabulous book by Terry Pluto, it was still third and fourth person narratives. And if you look at a lot of these, well, I thought, the rumor was, and somebody told me this, but this is the real deal. And the reason I got so fired up about it is when Dick told me the one story about the game in 1969, he looked at me in the eye and said, do you realize what really happened? And I said, no. I said, I played in the game, but I don't when he told me the story of how literally we were a 10-point underdog. We were supposed to lose, and the board of directors of the Pacers had already had a meeting the day before, and if we'd lost that game, they had already made plans to fold the team, file bankruptcy, and it was it. That was done, and the league was done, and that was it. Had this happened, there wouldn't be a route, there wouldn't be a Colts, there wouldn't be a downtown, there wouldn't be a Bankers Life Fieldhouse. It just wouldn't happen. And I didn't know this. Slick didn't know it. And I said, my gosh, you got to be kidding me. And that's when he said, we got to write a book. And then he starts telling stories about the merger. You know, he was the man that started all this merger, him and a guy named Dan Mason out of San Francisco. And the stories are almost like, you got to be kidding. Like Robin said, you got to be kidding. You know, truth is crazier than fiction half the time. And that's why it was so much fun to write the book.
Well, let's go back for a second, Bob. Let's go into that story, right? Because I'd love to get a little bit more color on that. So you're saying 1969 or so, and you know, based on some of our previous conversations about the Pacers, I mean, that was, you know, no doubt they were. And you mentioned Terry Pluto in his book Loose Balls, right? He calls the Indiana Pacers the Boston Celtics of the ABA, and I don't think that's too bad of a term, because arguably the team, although you're mentioning a story which may challenge the credibility of this, was perhaps the most stable franchise when you look back on it, right? Which may or may not be saying something, right? But 68-69, I mean, the team was in the finals, for God's sakes, against the Oakland Oaks, and I want to hear the story.
Okay, here's the story. See, what you're doing is you're a fan, you don't know, and I don't mean to be derogatory, but you really don't know what you're talking about. See, the thing of it is we were into the playoffs in 1969. First round of the playoffs, we played Kentucky, which everybody and their brother in Indianapolis hated. We got down 3-1. We were down 3-1 to the Kentucky Colonels in the first round of the playoffs. Now, I don't think there'd been a team, and maybe one, but I don't think there'd been a team in the playoffs in the NBA or either pro sports had ever come back from being down 3-1 in the playoffs at that time. So we were a total underdog. The first year in the league, we got beat by Pittsburgh in the playoffs. Done. It was over. So we got Mel Daniels, and there's another story about that in there. But here we are in the seventh game. The place is packed. We're a 10-point underdog. Kentucky, nobody ever won. Everybody thought we were going to get beat. And had we got beat, we didn't know this. The team had no clue that literally, bye-bye, the team is folding the next day. And the reason is they had no money, and nobody wanted to put any money in. Fortunately, we won that series. We went to Miami. We beat them in 4. And then we got to the playoffs and played Oakland, and we got beat, of course, in that finals. But that gave the team enough money and enough revenue and enough season ticket support to make it through another year. Had that not happened, it was bye-bye, and none of us knew. Not even the general manager of the Pacers knew this. Just Dick Tinkham and the board of directors. So it's a fascinating story, and the crazy thing of it is, you know, like I said, I didn't know it, but Dick Tinkham sure did.
Well, that's especially interesting. So I'm curious then, I mean, you must have had some inkling that the team wasn't doing all that well financially, or were you pretty much sort of insulated from that in your first 2 years there before this?
Neto was chasing women and playing. He didn't know. He had no. Those guys they didn't pay any attention to any stuff like that, and you wouldn't. I mean, the Pacers led the league in attendance, so you're thinking, well, everything's great. But the problem was that John DeVoe had been the guy that went out and gathered all the money, and he had died, and there was anybody to take his place. And Tinkham's a full-time lawyer, and he's trying to figure out how the hell are we going to piece this thing together. And all the guys that threw in a couple $1,000s to get the Pacers started, it was just a lark. It was something that, you know, it didn't cost them much money, and they just kind of, well, we'll see how this thing goes. Well, they weren't going to put any serious money into it. So, you know, when Tinkham's watching this seventh game, it's standing room only, and they're standing on top of each other. It's one of the great atmospheres of all time. They carried Slick. There's a great picture of Neto carrying Slick off the court after the game's over. But Tinkham couldn't enjoy the game because he's sitting there sweating bullets thinking, if we lose, we're done. And if the Pacers fold, the league is the next thing to fold. Because if the Pacers can't make it, how the hell can anybody else make it?
And the funny part of it is he's right about one thing. The players were totally oblivious to all this. We were just playing the game. We thought it was going to go on forever. And you have to remember, it isn't like today where these guys got $20 million a year. You know, guys are making the highest paid player on the team, maybe $22,000 a year. The entire team payroll was nothing. I mean, people, you didn't think of it in those terms back then. And truthfully, there was not one person, even Bobby Leonard, the coach, had no inkling that how close this whole thing was to blowing up. And the funny part of it is, throughout the book, there's also a couple other instances that happened that not even with the Pacers, that the league, like I said, there's one title where they quote Dick Tinkham saying, and I won't say that the cuss word, but he said the league was finished. For 6 hours, the league was completely finished, done, folded. And the way he brought it back together, literally by taking a guy in a bar and buying him a whiskey at 10 o'clock in the morning, saved the league. And it's a great story. And it's true.
Yep.
All right. Well, so let's back up for a second, right? So I actually want to maybe sort of go back to how you both got sort of entwined in this amazing story, the career arc of the ABA and the Indiana Pacers. Bob, I mean, you were a star player coming out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, right? And you were a star at Drake, and you were a second round draft pick in the NBA, I think, with the Rockets, the San Diego Rockets, correct?
Yeah.
But then here is this sort of thing bouncing around, literally and figuratively, this sort of ABA. How does the American Basketball Association even hit your radar? And then how does this even become an option, given what ostensibly seems like a pretty sweet deal by being drafted in the second round by an NBA franchise?
Well, back then, the second round pick, too, was like the 18th, 5th in the draft. There was only 12 teams after the expansion of the NBA. But you have to remember, back then, the NBA was about fourth in popularity behind bowling. I mean, there was nothing. The NBA was zilch. There was no TV coverage. Nobody really knew much about the NBA. And what they sent me a contract, and the Pacers sent me a contract, and I really didn't even think about playing professional basketball because, there was no money like it is today or anything. And I met with the Pacers. I talked to the San Diego, and to make a long story short, the Pacers offered me a no-cut contract and more money, and I went where the money was. Now, it wasn't big money, but I was one of the highest-paid players on the team the first year, and I think I made like $18,000 and got a Corvette out of the deal. But, in today's game, they're offering, a first-round draft choice is guaranteed to $10, $15 million, no matter if you can dribble a ball or chew gum. It's a totally different world back then. And like I said, the NBA wasn't, it wasn't even televised back then. You'd have to watch video replays of Wilt and Russell playing together if you wanted to see a NBA game back then. And I'll tell you one thing real quick to show you how television was. We show a P&L statement, which nobody's ever seen, of the first year, and Tinkham has it printed in the book. And I'm going to ask as a reporter, television now, I think they get $2.5 billion a year, that new contract they signed for television rights for television. What do you think the Pacers had a contract for television? They TV'd all the games through Channel 4. Guess what their total revenue for 1967 was? And I'm going to ask you a quick question. Take a quick guess, no matter what. Just take a guess.
I don't know. I'm trying to guess. Put in the dollars of that era. I don't know. Let's say $25,000.
Well, you take another zero off, and you got it.
You got it. $2,500.
$2,500 total revenue in television, where now it's almost $1 billion. I mean, think about that, and people just the modern era, I don't think they can quite understand this. That's why this book is cut so cool, is because we're telling stories that aren't just made up or aren't just he said, she said, like the guy that caught the fish, and by the time it got back to the eighth person, it was a shark. This is the real deal, and I was even, when I saw that P&L statement, I was shocked. And hell, I played there.
And so, how did you two get hooked up then? So, Robin, you were what? You were a team assistant. You were getting involved in journalism.
No, I was an 18-year-old sports writer at the Star, and I had just started at the Star. And I said, "Can I go out and write features on the Pacers?" And they said, "Yeah, whatever you want to do." They didn't care. They weren't going to pay me. I had to work in the office, but when I started doing Pacer features on my days off, or I'd go to practice and I started to get to know the players, and they'd print my stories. Well, Mike Storm was the general manager, and he's like, good Lord, I got this it's like having an extra PR guy, because there was all these wonderful little features about the players and all this positive publicity. And so Storm came to me and said, listen, if you want to take your days off and go on the road with us, I'll get you a room and pay for your airplane ticket. Well, that's kind of that's a little bit unethical in today's world, but back then we never thought, nobody thought anything about it. So I started traveling with the Pacers when I just turned 19. And, like I said, Neto took pity on me. And, it was, the thing that's interesting is we're not, those guys, Neto and Roger and Mel and Freddie, they weren't that much older than I was, but they were that much more mature than I was. And it certainly showed. Plus, I looked like I was about 14 years old. So Neto nicknamed me Jimmy Olsen, the cub reporter from the Superman series. And that kind of caught on. And, they took me with them. Like he said, it wasn't a journalist-athlete relationship. It was when they went to the bar after the game or a restaurant or wherever they went, I went with them. So I got to see everything. It was it was unlimited access, and it was one of the great times of my life.
Well, it also seems pretty shrewd too, right? Because that in some respects it ensured in some way, shape, or form some consistent coverage, right? And it's my understanding.
Well, it was very smart on Storen's part, because he's like, look, I get this kid that's gung-ho about writing about the Pacers. What the hell? I buy him an airplane ticket and get him a room? That's no big deal. Well, that's exactly what we'll do. We'll make this thing work. So, from my standpoint, it was, I got to hang with the Pacers really, they, by that time, the third year, they had really taken over the city. It was the first time we ever had a team to cheer for that people got behind, and Neto, and they'd go into Sam's Subway after the game, and people give them a standing ovation. They get free food and free drinks, and it caught the city's attention, and it captured their heart. And we'd never had that before, because all we ever had was AAA baseball, minor league hockey. We had the Indianapolis Olympians for a few years, but that was basically Kentucky guys playing in Indianapolis. So we never had anybody to cheer for, and the Pacers were the first team we ever got behind.
Well, let's talk about that. So, Bob, in particular, you were definitely one of the star attractions, shall we say, right, on this team. And maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of a sense of sort of, what was sort of going on. I mean, obviously, you're in the ABA, you're in this new city. It's all not that far away from the Midwest per se, but you're still in Indianapolis. What were the first couple of years like in terms of your relationships with the fans, and how quickly the fans took to this team? Because it's my understanding that a lot of people relatively quickly, despite the questions, I guess, of the stability of the ABA, really took to this Pacers franchise to the point of really trying to boost it as their true first professional franchise of any sort in the city of Indianapolis.
Well, the first year, they had to sell out the first night, and people were all gung-ho. But then, we had some problems, and we started losing a little bit, and we had some characters come in. I had the mumps for a month, and people got hurt. We had a guy named Reggie Harding who came, and there's an interesting story about Reggie in the book. And Reggie might or might not show up for a game. Great talent, just never came to the games too much. And after we got swept in the playoffs, it wasn't the best summer we ever had. And then, of course, towards the end of the summer, we got Mr. Daniels, and that again is another crazy story that's in the book. How they got Mel. I mean, it's amazing. And I can tell you right now for a fact, had we not got Mel Daniels, there wouldn't be a Colts, there wouldn't be a downtown, there would be nothing, because Mel was part of that team that beat Kentucky. And I can tell you that for an absolute fact, that had Mel Daniels the trade not happened for Mel Daniels, we wouldn't be talking right now. But we've got that in the book and things like that. But the second year, when we won that playoff series against Kentucky, it was almost like that was the turnaround. That's when the city, everything came together. People just went berserk. We got to the finals, and then of course the following year we ended up winning the championship, which was a great thing. And the thing is, we were lucky. We had a great team. You could not put together a team like we had in today's world, because number one, all the guys with all the scouts and all the draft and 30 teams, you could have never put a guy like Roger and me and Freddie and Mel. And then we get George McGinnis in the 5th year. George McGinnis comes here. Now, George is the number 1 player in the United States. You think we could have, and we just won a championship. You think there would be any way in hell we could have got him in the draft? No way today. It just couldn't have happened. So many things happened back then that just couldn't happen today. And it's just an amazing story. And the more you read, the more you say, if this is true, it's crazy. And it really was. And like I said, we had an unusually talented team. And I'll tell you, the key was when Slick came to us. If you notice in today's game, chemistry wins. You can have the greatest players in the world, and if they don't play together, New York is a typical example when they got Carmelo and all those guys. They couldn't play together. Slick came. We had great chemistry, and that was the key to our wins. And, of course, I think Roger Brown was probably one of the top 5 players that ever played basketball, period. And people, it's a shame, will ever know how great he really was. Well, he was.
It also
he was on another planet.
Well, it also seems, too, that the Pacers were quite good at assembling high-quality talent, right? So no doubt you're mentioning the heart and the spirit of the team, but obviously with just unquestioned talent that was able to be fused to play together. I guess I'm really curious as to sort of how from your perspective, the Pacers, it almost seems in retrospect, they almost cornered the market on some of the most consistently dominating talent during the 9-year, run in the ABA. I'm really curious as to how, was it the general management? Was it was it luck? Was it the finding the local players, which they became really good at?
A lot of it was luck. I mean, you can't tell me that back then they didn't even have scouts. In '67, I don't think a scout was Davy Crockett. I mean, they didn't have any scouts out there. It was a lot of luck, but you have to remember, myself, Freddie, Roger, the first team. Then we got Mel. And we stayed together. That nucleus of 4 guys were together. And then we got George the 5th year. But that nucleus stayed together for almost 7 years of that team franchise. And you don't see that hardly anymore. These guys jump from team to team and free agency and everything. But we had the same nucleus for almost 7 years. And that was a big, big part of it.
And the other thing that you got to remember is Mike Storn worked for the Cincinnati Royals, so he knew about Freddie, and they wanted to get Oscar Robertson, and Oscar Robertson decided he wasn't leaving the NBA. But he told him, you got to go get a guy named Roger Brown. So Mike Storn didn't know who Roger Brown was, but he soon found out after Oscar Robertson recommended him. You go get him. I don't know who picked. I'm not sure who said let's draft Neto, but like he said, he was being honest. He didn't know that he was going to play pro basketball, and he has this fabulous hook shot, and he's got all these great offensive skills. So they were kind of lucky they got Neto. Oscar Robertson to thank for getting Roger. Dick Tinkham is 100% thank. He's the guy you thank for getting Mel, because he basically stole him from the Minnesota Muskies for nothing, and it just fell into place. And then the ABA had territorial drafting. Well, they sure as hell weren't going to let the Kentucky Colonels draft George McGinnis, not when he grew up in Indianapolis wanting to play for the Pacers. They were smart enough to say, okay, George, if you're going to play in the ABA, it's going to be with the Pacers because that's your team. And that's how everything just kind of fell into place.
And that's a little hedging it, because George was signed as an underclassman back then when the NBA said, don't you do that. And they were right in the middle of merger negotiations. And there's a funny story in there about one of the NBA people were saying, Dick, maybe you shouldn't sign any NBA guy right now. And Dick said, well, I signed one guy. And the guy said, who? And he said, George McGinnis. And the guy about, pardon my expression, peed his pants from the NBA and said, why did you do that? But, the rest is history. But there's just all these crazy stories that could not happen in today's world. And like Robin said, we just we lucked out. We had some great players, and I'll tell you the reason Oscar said Roger was so good is because he used to play against him in the summers and realized this guy's as good as I am, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
Well, it also seems too. I mean, Robin, you mentioned the territorial draft concept. It feels to me that the Pacers were almost masterful at their ability to find talent within, especially the state of Indiana, through whatever means, right? Purdue and Indiana, and somebody was born and raised in Indianapolis. It seems like they're, in addition to the quote unquote star players that they somehow accrued. There was also, Rick Mount, and there's a bevy of folks that were almost known quantities by the fans in their college careers that almost naturally made sense, not only as quality players up and down the court, but also from a marketing perspective to get fans in the seats.
Well, Storn knew that he knew that you're starting a brand new league and a brand new team, so he went and got Jimmy Rail, who was a star at Kokomo in Indiana. He went and got Ron Bono, who was Mr. Basketball for months. He went to Neto's buddies. So you had a couple of local guys, Bobby Joe Edmonds from Christmas Addicts. So you had three local guys that people had actually heard of. And then Billy Keller came along from Purdue, and nobody knew he was going to be a great three-point shooter, but he turned out to be a fabulous three-point shooter. And Rick was, one of the great shooters of all time. It didn't really work out for him like it did Billy and Neto and the other guys, but he was part of a championship team. And Storn understood it was important that you had, it was the Indiana Pacers, and I think he really took that to heart, that he was going to try and get as many guys that were known around the state as he could that could play basketball. I mean, every draft choice and every signing wasn't a hit, but the Pacers had pretty good success. But like Neto said, the reason they were so successful is George, Roger, Mel, Freddie, and Neto. They kept that nucleus, especially the original guys, and that can't happen anymore. And that's why they were so successful. And when Slick came in and gave him some discipline and some direction, that's all it needed. And from that point on, it's like when they played the Knicks and the Baltimore Bullets in exhibition games and played them to a standstill. And I think everybody, I remember interviewing Walt Frazier after the Knicks game, and he said these guys could play with anybody in the NBA. He goes, they got all kinds of talent. I mean, I think that really opened people's eyes at those first exhibition games.
All right, just when it was getting interesting, let's bring this to a grinding halt, shall we? Just kidding. We got to pay the bills around here, and our friends at Audible have been very helpful in attempting to allow us to pay some of those bills, and we want to call them out now and remind you that a free audiobook download is yours for the taking, and also a free 1-month subscription to the service of Audible at audibletrial.com/goodseats. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats for your free 1-month trial of the Audible service, and most interestingly, a free audiobook download for you to enjoy. 180,000 titles and growing every day to choose from, and there's absolutely no excuse to not find at least one title amongst that cavernous selection available to you that you won't find to be enjoyable and good for the soul, including a couple of books that might be interesting to our audience. And yes, some new ones, frankly, that I'm finally listening to. One that I'm listening to right now is by Carson Cunningham. It's narrated by Paul Bamer, and it's called Underbelly Hoops, Adventures in the CBA, a.k.a. the Crazy Basketball Association, which is really, of course, about the Continental Basketball Association, which for many years was sort of this ragtag minor league of the NBA. And it's a book I'm about 2 chapters into right now, and hopefully maybe a guest will get for a future episode. Also, in my queue, next up, is another guest that I'd like to get, and her book that she wrote is also narrated by her. Her name is Jeannie Buss, and of course, Jeannie is the daughter of Jerry Buss, of course, the wildly successful founder of the Los Angeles Lakers and the LA Forum, and Jeannie is clearly today the brains behind the Los Angeles Lakers today. She and her brothers were active, of course, in things like, along with her father, World Team Tennis, the Major Indoor Soccer League with the LA Lasers, all kinds of stuff. So her book is next on my list. That's called Laker Girl, and that too is available on Audible. And again, it's one of the the many thousands of titles that you can choose from when you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats. And again, you too can get your free audiobook download to give it a try, perhaps one of those two, or perhaps one of the other 180,000 titles available to you as well. Give it a try, audibletrial.com/goodseats. Thanks for listening, and back to our conversation. Let's talk about some of the play, right? So, everything from the arenas, which I'm sure, ranged from pretty decent to borderline ramshackle. The scheduling, I'm sure, was a bit grueling and not necessarily glamorous. I guess I'd love to get a little sense from you guys, having been, playing and on the road, what sort of the day-to-day experience was like. Especially perhaps with rumors of the league or various teams, or frankly, actually teams folding or running down into the ground. What was the experience like? I mean, did you feel like quote unquote top flight pro players, or did you sometimes wonder, what you had gotten into and how it was taking a toll on your body and the quality of play, or was it just too much fun to kind of worry about any of that kind of stuff?
Well, the Pacers were different. I mean, this was probably the best run organization in the league. I mean, we never had worried about our checks not bouncing. I mean, I can remember Doug Moe and Larry Brown telling me when they played New Orleans, they get their checks on, and the team they'd all sprint to get to the bank first because they were worried that some of the checks wouldn't cash. We never ever thought that. I mean, I can remember playing. I never once even thought of the league folding, of the team having money problems. We just didn't think about that then. And there was really no rumors of that then here in Indiana. Now, I'm sure there was in other teams like Houston. I mean, the cab drivers didn't even know Houston had a team down there half the time. But, we flew coach like everybody else did. We had $6-7 a day meal.
$7 a day per diem, baby.
That's right. And Freddie and Mel would go buy a bucket of fried chicken and sit in their room all day and play cards. And this kind of things went on. And towards the end, the last couple of years, the finally organized a player association, and they got us so we could fly first class, so we at least have leg room and everything. But I think even the NBA flew coach back then. It was just totally different than it is today. But what they don't understand, and the reason we named this book "We Changed the Game" is because we did change the game. And even Walt Frazier said, and we quoted in the book in an article about last summer, he was talking about the ABA, and he basically said the NBA today is the ABA. And if you look at it, you're not watching an NBA game, you're watching an ABA game. I mean, what was it? Houston took 53 pointers.
53 pointers the other night.
53 pointers. I mean, the game has and it's like everything. Everything has to change. Cars change, everything, clothes change. The NBA had to change. The NBA was dying, and the ABA came along and brought some showtime to the. We're the ones that started cheerleaders. We're the ones that started the dunk contest. We started the All-Star games extravaganza, and some of the people in there actually. We interviewed a girl named Sandy Knapp, who was president of the Indianapolis Sports Corp and worked for the Pacers. She does an article in the book about how it not only changed the game on the court, but it changed the game in the front office and marketing and everything else. So it's pretty interesting.
Here's the other thing, Tim. There was a feeling for a guy like Roger Brown that had been blackballed, completely screwed over from playing in the NBA, and he was very skeptical about leaving his job in Dayton, but he finally got going. And he's one of those guys that actually got a second chance to play basketball. And there was so many guys in the ABA that were thankful because, like Neto said, there were 8 teams. There was no place to play unless the Eastern League or AAU. So many guys that were really good basketball players didn't have anywhere to go. And then the ABA starts. So there was a feeling there was an appreciation that doesn't exist today. Everybody was happy to have a place to play, and they'd been kind of gotten a reprieve that, my God, we're getting paid to play basketball, and that's the way you got that feeling from them. That's the way they felt.
Yeah, back then there was, I think, 66 or 65. There was 8 teams in the NBA, 80 players total. Now there's 30 teams with 14 or 15 on a team. I mean, it's just when you look at all the numbers, it's pretty fascinating.
As a player, what were the most intriguing and fun parts of the game and the changes of the rules, and what were the most daunting? Right, you had the 3-point shot, you got the 24-second shot clock. You got a couple of other sort of other things. Was it an easy adjustment to these relatively new and untested rules, or did you kind of just blend right in, or was it kind of a mixed bag? And how were your fellow players dealing with this sort of wide open and more woolly approach to play?
Well, I think the first year or two, the 3-pointer was new, and a lot of people were hesitant to take it for a while. I mean, it was kind of all of a sudden, people started emerging. Players started emerging. Some guy could out and just shoot the lights off the 3-pointer. All of a sudden, he became a pretty good asset. I mean, and it changed how some players were playing. I mean, there was guys that could shoot like a Billy Keller. Now, if they didn't have a 3-point shot, Billy Keller would be nearly as effective, because Billy Keller was not he couldn't jump an inch off the floor. He was 5'10", but the guy could hit 3-pointers all day long. He's a great shooter, and it opened up the game. Like I said, it changed the game of basketball. Period. What do you think, Robin?
Well, there's in one of the chapters, the best chapter in our book is called "Which One of You Assholes is Tinkham," and that's the name of the chapter. And the guy that said that was Ned Irish, the guy that owned the New York Knicks. So when Tinkham went to his first merger meeting, he got besieged by this guy. This guy says, we don't appreciate guys like you suing us, because they had to file a lawsuit. It's a long story, but it helped lead to the merger. And Ned Irish told Dick, he says, I don't know a lot about you or the Pacers or the ABA or anything, but I'm going to tell you 2 things. We ain't never going to have a shot that counts 3 points, and we ain't playing with a beach ball. Well, the 3-point shot revolutionized basketball, and today it's revolutionized college, high schools, and the pros, because if you don't shoot it, you don't have a prayer. And I think that was another part of the ABA. Like Red Auerbach, the dickhead of all time from the Boston Celtics, hated the idea that there was another league, and he said this thing won't last 6 months. These guys are clowns. They're playing with a beach ball. Nobody takes them serious, blah, 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 blah. Well, what really happened is between the Pacers, Dr. J, Spencer Haywood, George Gervin, David Thompson, all these guys that came into the ABA and followed Neto and Roger and Mel's lead, they were some of the best players in the league, and you didn't have to know a lot about basketball to say, shit, these guys are as good as anybody. And that's exactly what the ABA did. And like Neto said, the first ABA All-Star, they have a dunk contest by the early to mid 70s, and suddenly people are talking about the ABA. And when Bobby Leonard was playing in the NBA, he said, you brought the ball up slow and backed it in, and nobody ran. There weren't, other than the Celtics, nobody had a fast break. It was a boring game that nobody really cared about. The ABA was just the opposite. The ABA was Wild West and tennis shoes, 3-pointers galore. The Pacers one time, Neto just scored 172 or 177 points one time.
177.
177 points, Tim, in an ABA game. It was the all-time record. It might still be. I don't know. And people got excited about that because it was fun to watch.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. Babe McCarthy was one of the great coaches in the ABA. Good old Babe. He's Magnolia mouth. He was from the South. He had that Southern accent. And he told me the story. He walked into the locker room after we beat Pittsburgh, I think, 177 to 144. So we beat them by 43 points. And he walked into his locker room and he said, boys, I just want to tell you something. He said, them damn Pittsburgh Poppers scored 144 points against the Pacers. And naturally, all the guys thought the Pittsburgh killed us. And then he looked at it and said, and them damn Pacers won by 43 points. And that was, he was, but that, it was,
yeah.
I start, but I can't stop talking.
No, it's great. I mean, it's yet another defensive struggle in the ABA, right? So give me a sense then of of the play. I mean, were they? You know, it seems to me like the players truly enjoyed, and as Robin was sort of hinting at, and many were actually grateful for the opportunity, especially if they couldn't get a look at the NBA and stuff. Because look, this is a theme that we've heard and seen in our previous conversations for a bunch of leagues and sports, especially during the late 60s and early mid 1970s, right, where you had a bunch of challenger leagues, right, the WHA against the NHL, and then the forced expansion that brought about. Certainly the ABA kicking the butt of a very staid and boring and to your point, Bob, not even sort of well known or televised sport of basketball. The WFL, misguided and floundering as it was, right, was a challenge to football. It just, you get the sense, and I sadly wasn't there for much of it, but you get the sense that not only was it more fun, but it just brought more life to the game, and the players, by many accounts, just seem to have embraced the ability to play, express, wear their hair long like Darnell Hillman and the Major League Fro, and it just seemed like it was a more freer spirit, so to speak. Kind of a play.
Yeah, the NBA was pretty buttoned down and had its little rules and didn't approve of this and didn't approve of that. But I'll tell you one thing that people don't realize is that, and it was in both leagues back then compared to today, it was a physical game. They don't. It was much more physical than it is today. I mean, there were like how many? Well, we had 82 games the first year. How many fights do we have, Robin? 82?
Oh, 50.
At least. And there was no technicals. It was a tough, rough game, and there wasn't any of this coddling guys or the little shoving. I mean, it was a tough game, and I think today's game they've cleaned it up a little bit because of television or the fans. They don't want to see a fight every other game. But I mean, it was a very physical game back then. It was fun. I mean, the running joke we had on our team was the first year Mel Daniels was here, we had 82 games and we had 82 fights, and Mel started all of them.
Was the refereeing especially bad? Am I just reading into?
Oh no! The referee was good. The refereeing was good. It's just one time we had a game. We had a guy playing on our team named Spider Bennett. And he was mad at one of the Kentucky players, and we had a timeout. He just walked down to the Kentucky huddle, poked the guy on the shoulder, and cold cocked him. And no technical, nothing. Just said, "Don't do that again." I mean, that was the way it was back then. It was a little different than it is today. Of course, back then, a technical was $25, not $25,000 like it is today.
All right. Well, Robin, you had a pretty good bird's eye view of the players, both not only on the court, but let's be honest, off the court as well. Bob, I'll get to you in a second because you've got some interesting little tidbits that we want to unearth a bit. But Robin, I want to get your sort of quote unquote objective perspective of some of the, the off-court antics and/or the personalities, shall we say, and how those personalities were expressed, not on the court, but off of it, that you're willing to share, of course.
Well, I mean, there are a bunch of young guys who've got a second lease on life playing pro basketball, and they didn't fly out after the game was over. They got to stay in the city that night, so all these guys could set up residency, and everybody had a girlfriend in a certain city, and then you had this great competition for who's gonna get laid and who's gonna pick up who. And Neto made him crazy because he never spent a dime on a drink for a woman in his life, and he ended up leaving half the time. He left with the girl that they were all buying drinks for, so that pissed him off. And it was the late '60s and early '70s, and it was the sexual revolution, and it was a great time to be alive. And these are young guys, young athletes enjoying life, and there's nobody had any more fun playing basketball or chasing women or just living day to day than the guys did in the ABA. It was like, God, we're getting paid. This is really a lot of fun. I could get used to this life. So, the guys on our team that were the lady killers were Steve Cuban, Tom Thacker, Neto. Billy Keller did okay after I think Neto gave him some tips, and he finally learned how to pick up a woman. He got better, but it was just I think that was it was probably no different than how kids in the early 20s lived their life everywhere else. It was just that these guys all stuck together, and there were no cliches on the team. Everybody hung out together. Everybody went out to the bar together. Everybody went out to eat together, and there was no color line, and there was no cliques, and it was just, it's the kind of thing that probably could never happen again, and it was just kind of natural. Everybody just kind of was, Slick really preached, we're a family, we're a team. We're not going to have we're not going to have 2 or 3 guys that go on their own way. Everybody's together. And I think he really helped mold that attitude, and it just carried on. So if you became a member of the Pacers, I remember when Art Becker came here from Houston, he thought he died and gone to heaven because he's hanging out with Neto and Billy Keller and the boys and having more fun than they're winning basketball games, and they're going afterwards. And it was like, God, this is the way it's supposed to be. I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah, well, that said, though, I don't want to call it partying lifestyle, but certainly the social lives that endured after the game was over, right? That it's kind of hard, though, to burn the candle at both ends, though, right? Without sort of the quality of play suffering, or am I just being?
Not these guys. They played pretty well when they were hungover.
And Bob, can you attest to that, either personally or what is your sense of how guys came back onto the court after perhaps some interesting extracurricular activities?
I opened my bar in 1970, a club that I opened, and it was an interesting story in Indianapolis. You see, I don't know how old are you by any chance?
I am
my interviewer.
I am 52, but I am certainly aware of Neto's in the Meadows, and I think that's what you're alluding to, right?
Well, what I was saying is back in the late 60s, you got to remember there was no Indianapolis there was still the racial problems, and there wasn't any place in the city I could remember that blacks and whites mingled and had fun and did everything. And that my place that didn't cut it. Everybody had a good time. Black people, it didn't matter. We had a great time at my nightclub. And I've talked to some people, some leaders in the city have told me, he said, the Pacers and your club helped heal the city a lot. It was fun. And it really was. We never had a fight. We never had a problem. We had all kinds of guys in there. But as you were saying about the performance, the best game I ever played was the best scoring game. I scored 43 points against the LA Stars back in 70 or 71. I can't remember when it was, or something like that. But the night before, we played in Miami, and I stayed up all night with Steve Cuban and a couple of young stewardesses, and I got to the airport, and I didn't sleep a wink. I'd had about 350 beers. I got on the plane. We flew to L.A. Early that morning. We had an afternoon game for some reason. I don't know how we did it. I had the best game of my life. So the misnomer is you drink a few beers or you have fun the night before, you're in shape. I mean, you're in physically good shape, and I don't think a couple of beers the night before is going to affect your game in the least. At least didn't mind. Maybe some guys it does, but how about Chico Vaughn, Robin?
Yep, Chico Vaughn and Charlie Williams. They'd line up they played at Pittsburgh. They'd line up for the jump ball, and whoever was guarding them would just go up and smell their breath and go, "Oh, baby," because they'd be drinking right up till the game started.
And that's the truth.
And they could shoot it. And they could shoot it sober or they could shoot it drunk. They were both hellacious.
So walk us through a night at Neto's, Bob. I mean, what would one see and expect? I'm assuming after the game it was a popular hang-up, but also, not on game nights too, right?
Yeah, well, funny part, during the game, it got so bad that people would actually leave at the end of the third quarter to get in line to get a seat. I mean, we'd have a line around the block, and it was great. And we go inside, and it was fun. And during the even the off season, it was people would show up, and it just and during race time was great. We had a lot of race drivers come in, and the race drivers come in, all the girls come in, and we had some movie stars show up. James Garner used to come all the time to the place, and And we just had a lot of fun, but it was good. I mean, I'd say drink a few beers, but it wasn't. There was no fights. There was no. It was just a really fun place to be at, and you know, I can't believe I survived 4 years of it, but it was fun.
Well, how was it to be an actual bar owner?
Yeah, we let Robin. We give Robin a double shot of Pepsi. Robin wasn't too much of a drinker.
No, I didn't drink. I watched. I observed.
I'm sure that's the case, and I'm sure that's not the first little fib or stretch of the truth that you've.
No, I don't drink. I don't. I never did. I never drank.
Robin's a non-drinker, believe it or not.
Well, you guys mentioned sort of the impact that the Pacers had on the city and of Indianapolis and the state of Indiana. I think probably the most obvious expression of that was the arrival, the building of, and the subsequent arrival of Market Square Arena. And it's my understanding that Dick Tinkham was very instrumental in that process. And in addition, it was also, frankly, probably the most outward show of support, I guess, by the community around this team in all its professionalism, albeit still in the ABA at that point. I'm really curious to sort of get your senses of both of you of that transition from the fairgrounds to arguably one of the most state of the art downtown stadiums, arenas at that time. And did you at that point, did you kind of think that you truly had made an impact and it arrived, even though the ABA was still not necessarily guaranteed going forward?
Well, we could tell you the story about that. There's a whole chapter about that in the book, how it happened, the things that happened that were just, like you said, you Ripley's Believe It or Not. The way it happened with the arena is fascinating. And Dick Luger was right in the middle of it, and Tinkham was right in the middle of it. And it was almost, they had originally planned to build the arena out by where the Colts facility is now out on the west side. And how that all came to be, and how it all fell apart, and how boom, 20 minutes later, everything came together with the arena. Because I don't think, had we not built the arena, we just were, we were getting too big for the Coliseum, and they were talking about moving the team and all kinds of wild stuff that went on. But I don't want to tell you too much, because that's why I want people to read the book. But I think they'll be fascinated with that chapter. Don't you think, Robin?
The name of the chapter is the MSA, the Miracle of MSA, or the MSA Miracle, whatever. It's the biggest upset fluke. The fact that that MSA ended up being where it was at the time it was, the way it was funded, is a typical ABA story that you just shake your head and go, well, that could never happen today, because it couldn't. Couldn't happen.
No way.
Now, do you think the building, the construction of that arena was instrumental in the Pacers being one of the four teams that got absorbed into the NBA 2 years later in '76, or were there other factors?
No, I think it was more the fact that we had such good attendance and it was so loyal. Don't you know? Right.
We had such good attendance. We had such good teams, and the ownership we had one guy mainly Bill Eason, who was willing to put up a big chunk of money to buy us into the NBA. I mean, the best deal in the world, of course, is the St. Louis guys. I mean, they said, no, we aren't going to do it, and they end up getting almost $1 billion out of the deal for not going in the NBA. So, but the Pacers were a natural, and that story is kind of in there. Dick goes through that story and the way the merger went down, and it was it's a fascinating thing that you read this stuff and you say, this is crazy. How could this stuff happen? But the Pacers, I think the Pacers were destined to be in the NBA no matter what. And the thing of it is, like Bob Costas wrote us a great review of the book. And in the thing he states, we are the only ABA team that kept the same city, the same name, and ended up in the NBA. The original. We're the only original team that ever did that. And the rest of them, like the Spurs, they were originally Dallas Chaparrals. Denver was the Denver Nuggets, and then the Denver somebody else's. And the Nets were the New Jersey Nets, and then it became the New York Nets and things like that. So the Pacers have some really great and fascinating history as far as that goes.
Why, Bob, did you not segue into the NBA with the team? Were you sort of near the end of your career? Did you have the opportunity and chose not to? Did you?
Well,
I'm just curious as to.
That's the long story. The ninth year I was going to play, I really wasn't very happy with the team, and there was kind of some personal things that happened there. But the funny part of it is, after the ninth year, they wanted me. They called me in the front office and said, "Well, if you want to retire, you can do this." And I made them a deal. I said, "Okay." I got about 3 times my salary to retire, but I did. I forget what I was making, but I said, "You take it 3 times and spread it out over 6 years, and I'll be happy to retire." Which I did, and that was the Binford Group, and Tom Binford and those guys. They might have been smart businessmen, but they didn't know squat about basketball. And so I retired. But then the funny part, the next year I went over to Cleveland where Bill Fitch was coaching, and I knew Bill Fitch from Cedar Rapids. He coached at Coe College, and I almost played for Cleveland for a year. I could have played in the NBA for a year, but I had a house here, a dog here, and I was just getting married, and basically I was burned out. I was ready to quit. I was just ready to hang them up, and maybe I should have stayed there a couple of years longer. But you get to that point where, I was 34, I think, and all of a sudden overnight, your body you lose that step. And believe me, it happens overnight. All of a sudden that step just isn't there. So, I just said, ta-ta, I retired.
Well, look, it's also a testament to your knowledge of thyself, right? And, there are plenty of players, both, this is an age-old issue, right, who kind of don't really know how and when to, say enough is enough and perhaps push it a little too far, or perhaps worse, embarrassment and all those kinds of things, right? So that's a testament to you and as a player to knowing that stuff. But it's also, by the way, and Robin, if you want to chime in, it also seems to be a testament to this team and the city, right? Because you're still, a part of the Indianapolis community, and it seems like a lot of other former players stuck around as well after their careers wound down.
And I think that tells you a lot about the relationship. Mel stayed here, Roger stayed here. Obviously, George grew up here, and Neto stayed here. I mean, it's the cliche of all time, but it was a family like no other. And it's, how many guys? I mean, we went over and saw Slick today. George McGinnis and Neto and I went and saw Slick today, and we go to lunch once a month or twice a month. And when Mel was still alive, him and Neto had lunch, 2 or 3 times a week, and always went and saw Slick. I just don't think that happens I think it's such an anomaly. I don't think very many pro franchises, whether it's basketball, baseball, or football, has that kind of camaraderie, and it lasts for 40 or 50 or 60 years.
And how would you guys describe the current day Pacers in the NBA and the embrace or lack thereof, or what of the original sort of foundational ABA version of the Pacers? Is there a continued love and or appreciation? Is there a lack thereof? And maybe, by the way, in general, the ABA and the NBA per your observations, is there sort of lost history there and maybe a need to kind of rekindle and reheat and truly remember some of these things? I mean, obviously the title of your book sort of implies it, but I'm also wondering, it seems like Indy is maybe an exception to that rule where this franchise is just intertwined with its history, perhaps more so than any other franchise.
What do you think, Robin?
You can't have Neto answer this question. I'll answer it because here's the thing. If Slick wasn't the color analyst, I don't know. I mean, the Pacers, sometimes they act like they really care about the ABA, and sometimes they act like they really don't care. And they've had some decade nights and things like that, which are really cool. And I think when you see the response from the audience, that should tell the Pacers everything they need to know, that this is your heritage, boys. This is what got you started. Without these guys, there wouldn't be any Pacers, and you wouldn't have a job. So I think that I don't know. I don't think reluctance is the right word. I just don't know that maybe, some of the guys have worked. I mean, Darnell still works for the Pacers. Billy and Neto worked there for a while. Mel was a scout for 30 years. So it wasn't like they turned their back on the ABA guys. It's just that I would think as much success as they had in the ABA, and they've never won the NBA championship, that you'd want to play on your past history as much as you could.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that that's only an NBA/ABA team and league thing. I feel that with all of our looks back to the NHL with regard to the WHA. Certainly, the NFL loves to not acknowledge any other challenger league or team in its rich history, despite all the changes and interesting stories that sort of came along the way. So, it is that sort of, I almost call it love-hate relationship, but it's almost again, you have to wonder. I mean, and look at this, and this uniquely, this team, this franchise, right, would not be here had it not been for the ABA. I mean, they were an original franchise at the beginning. They were one of the 4 surviving teams on the way out. And again, perhaps more foundationally than any other of the 4 teams that made it into the NBA, its life, its heritage, and luckily, a number of players and former coaches are still involved with the team. You'd think there would be a little bit more love there than not.
Yeah, I mean, I get the fact that they're trying to sell this. I mean, the Pacers this year have kind of caught the city's imagination with Victor Oladipo, and they're kind of fun to watch, and they share the ball, and suddenly the Indianapolis is a little excited about the Pacers again, which is kind of cool. And I don't think it's necessarily an indifference towards the ABA. It's maybe just not. I don't know. Maybe we're too close to it. Maybe sometimes, but to embrace the tradition and to see, when you look up and you see whose numbers are retired. I mean, the fact that Neto's number is not retired and Freddie's number is not retired is ridiculous. They're part of the nucleus that made this city's basketball franchise, and they should be part of it. And Slick agrees, and Mel always agreed. It's just that, when Neto's walking into a restaurant or a grocery store or something like that, it's inevitable. Somebody always says, "Hey, Neto, I love watching you play." He hadn't played for 50 years or 40 years there, and people still remember. So that's pretty cool.
What I think is also pretty cool, and I want to use the rest of our time here for you guys to promote the book. Right? It's called "We Changed the Game," and it is available for pre-order. When is it, Robin? When's it coming out? And when and how will we see more of you to promote this book?
Tell him, Neto.
Well, I think the printing is supposedly going to be done at the end of the month, so it'll be available to get it probably the 1st of March, the end of February. I know one thing. I talked to the publisher the other day, and it's on Amazon, and I don't know if they correct it or not, but I know if you buy more than one book, you get free shipping and things like that. So I think everybody ought to go out and buy about 5 books a piece, and I think they'd enjoy it. But it's going to be out. We're going to have some book signings. It's all going to lead up to the ABA reunion, which is in April 6th and 7th. They're going to have probably 100 guys that used to play in the ABA, from Julius Erving down to Billy Shepard here for the ABA reunion that's going to be held downtown. It's going to be a really great deal. We're going to have some book signings there, and I think people will really enjoy this book. There's a lot of books been written, but there's never been one quite like this. And I'm not bragging or anything. I'm just saying this comes from first person. This isn't stories. This is the real deal. And it even amazed me, some of the stories.
Here's the thing, Tim. It's not 500 pages. I think it's 240 pages. It's a pretty quick read, but it's pretty much the chronology of how the whole thing is. It could never happen again. 6 guys put $1,000 in and get a basketball franchise. Are you kidding me? And the pitfalls and the characters and the different changes in management and all the times they almost folded, and the telethon and getting into the NBA and how bad you got beat up with the merger and how far that put the Pacers behind. It's this amazing journey of a little team that nobody thought the ABA was going to be around for 2 or 3 years, let alone as long as it was, and nobody was really sure that anybody would even go to the games. So to think that it grew into what it did is it's not just a sports story. It's this great historical story about Indianapolis, Indiana, and how one team and a bunch of guys with a nucleus of 4 or 5 guys and Bobby Leonard as the coach rallied the city behind a basketball team, and it made it all the way down to downtown, and then the next thing you know, we got a football team, and then we got restaurants, and now we got 7,000 hotel rooms, and suddenly Indianapolis is this progressive city. Well, do the Pacers get credit for everything? No, of course not. But without the Pacers, I don't think it ever happened.
And one last thing I want to call out here is this relationship and the donation of some of the profits of this book to something called the Dropping Dimes Foundation. You guys want to give our listeners a bit of a background as to what that's all about? And noble, I believe, it certainly is.
I can tell you about that. I started a little thing about 9 years ago. The ABA, all the ABA players were supposed to, during the merger, were promised that they would be included in the pension plan with the NBA. And as usual with the ABA, everybody forgot, and practically everybody's dead now, so it doesn't matter. And none of these guys have a pension. And I've been trying to get them, or at least do what the NBA did for the pre-65 NBA guys, and give them a small pension, maybe a 10% of what the NBA is getting, but still it's something for these guys. Because there's a lot of guys out there, believe it or not, nobody made any money back then. And I've been talking to, I started out with almost 200 guys that were eligible for a pension 8 years ago, and over 50 of them have died since then. And some of these guys are living in basically under a bridge, and it's $1,000 a month would really help these guys. NBA pensions are paying $20,000 a month to some guys, so it's really unfair. And a guy named David, who's a team eye surgeon, and John was a ball boy back when I was playing. He's now an eye surgeon for the Pacers. A guy named Scott Tarter, who was with Bose McKinney downtown, a lawyer, got together. They're big Pacer fans with Ted Green, who's a documentary maker, and they formed this charitable foundation because they're huge ABA fans to help ABA guys that are in need. And that's not necessarily guys that might be eligible for a pension. This is a guy that played 1 or 2 years, and they've been helping guys out all over the country. They've helped. We went down to Kentucky to a guy that was in a nursing home, and they bought him some clothes. A guy named Charlie Jordan, who played with the Pacers, didn't have a dime, and all he wanted was a suit so he could go to church. We took him to a clothing store and bought him clothes and shoes and a shirt. A guy named Sam Smith, who played with the Minnesota Muskies, didn't have the money to drive his own college championship team reunion. They sent him to the reunion and paid for his expenses. So it's really a good deal, and we put together an advisory board that's great. Bob Costas is on our board, Dan Issel, Spencer Haywood, Rick Barry, Louis Dampier, Matt Calvin, George McGinnis, Bobby Leonard, Peter Vesey, myself. We've got 12 Hall of Famers on this advisory board. So people realize that this is a great little organization, and they're helping people out, and they're putting on the ABA reunion too. All the profits go to the ABA reunion. So we've dedicated part of our profits to this book, to the charity, and I think they do a wonderful job. And I could name about 6 other things they've done, but I won't take the time up. But it's a very worthwhile organization, and I'm proud to be part of it.
It's the nicest thing Neto's ever done for the human race, Tim.
Well,
he hadn't done a lot of nice things, but he's worked his ass off on this and the pension. And if it wasn't for Neto, I mean, he really has all these guys you hear that are destitute, living under bridges, don't have any money. It's true, and it's really sad how the NBA is just kind of act like these guys don't exist. And Neto's been front and center trying to put this whole thing together for the last 5 or 6 years, and he's worked his butt off.
The sad part of it is what it would cost the NBA. They probably spend more in coffee creamer money at their offices than it would cost. It's a very small amount of money compared to the billions that the NBA has. But hopefully, we've been talking to the NBA, and I know Bob Costas has been helping us, and hopefully we're going to get somewhere shortly. But it's going to be a pretty cool deal, and I'm just, like I said, I'm happy to do it. And even Robin, Robin, the only person we should take care of that wasn't a player is Robin was one of my early charity cases, but I've got him straightened around. Yeah, he's okay now.
That's it.
All right, a fun chat. Thank you to Neto and Robin Miller for enlightening us on some more interesting stuff about the Pacers, the ABA. Let's sort of recap all of this here. The book, which is a must-get, a must-read. It comes out in the tail end of February, early part of March. It is available for pre-order wherever books are sold. You will find a link to it on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search for episode 48. You will find a link to it. The book, it's called We Changed the Game: How a New League, a Small Group of Dreamers in Some Amazing Situations Changed the Culture of a City and the Face of Basketball Forever. It is written by Bob Netolicky, by Robin Miller, and also Dick Tinkham, the co-founder, co-owner of the original franchise that he was instrumental in helping bring to the city of Indianapolis. We Changed the Game. That's the name of the book. And we encourage you to grab a copy. It is published by Hilton Publishing. And as we said, a portion of the proceeds of this book will be going to the Dropping Dimes Foundation, which we discussed is dedicated to, it's a nonprofit dedicated to helping former ABA players in financial and medical need as they advance in age. And, for all intents and purposes, we're not, frankly, beneficiaries of some of the major money that exists in today's modern basketball game. It's a great cause. And you can find out more about them and make a donation and support at droppingdimes.org. Again, droppingdimes.org. And it's also there where you will find more information about the 50th ABA celebration that the Dropping Dimes Foundation is helping put together. It will be in Indianapolis on April 7th at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. And you can find out all kinds of information about that and just about every major player that is still living and breathing from the ABA, including folks like Dr. J and a whole bunch of Pacers players for sure. And Bob Costas will be there. He had the St. Louis Spirits for 1 year, will be emceeing that event on April 7th at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. And that should be a fun hootenanny, as we say. And I'm hoping myself to get there too, because it just seems like a real rare opportunity to hang out and talk about the great times that was and continues to be the old ABA. All right, so let's see. For us, we want to remind you that goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's our website. That's the place where you can find out everything that's going on with this here little show. All of our old episodes are there. All of our the links to various books and media that we talk about here on the show. We've got a whole array of photography of cool images from the teams and leagues and people we've talked to. Check it out, goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll see all of our social links there as well. On Twitter, we're at goodseatsstill. You will find us on Instagram at goodseatsstillavailable. On Facebook, there's a page devoted to the show as well. Check any and all of those out. Follow us and communicate with us there. If you want to send us some email, just go to our website and you'll find a link to sending us an email as well. And last but not least, we want to thank our friends at Podfly Productions for their expertise in helping put our show together production-wise. We couldn't do it without them. That's David Gregerson and Eric Begay, Corey Coates, and of course the inimitable, the one, the only, Dr. Jerry Payne. I gave him the doctor title. I don't know if he's a doctor or not, but it sounds good. He's the chief cook and bottle washer for this here show, and we appreciate his efforts as well as the guys as well. Podfly.net. That's the place to go. Podfly Productions. They can help you with just about anything to get you going into podcasting like I did and have, and encourage you to check them out and tell them we sent you. All right, that's it for me. I appreciate your listening. We'll talk to you next week. Until then, take care, everybody.
Thank you.